the picture that you all saw in the intro, and that's also on here, is actually one of my most favorite memories of my time in Afghanistan. It's when a group of friends and I climbed to the top of the Soviet silo that they built in Kabul, and we took up our own breakfast, and we enjoyed breakfast on the rooftop with this incredible view over the city that we all love dearly. Here's a quick overview. These are the countries that I've been to. Aside from Afghanistan, you're probably going to notice also Iran, Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Lebanon, Jordan, and so on. I'm not a bucket list traveler. I go to these places many times. I've, for example, this year been to Jordan just 4 times, and that you will later see what I'm doing in Jordan. As you probably know, most of these countries have a high travel warning. They're considered extremely dangerous. People are urged to leave them, to go home. And so if you could ask me one question right now, it's probably this. And to be honest with you, I'm usually very scared, although less scared than of doing this TED Talk. I'm scared usually from the moment that I book my flight to pretty much the time when I board the plane, because as soon as I get on the plane, I'm surrounded by the most incredible, hospitable, welcoming, curious people. And usually even on the plane, people give me their phone number. They tell me, if you need anything, let us know. You know, we're there for you. And then also, once I'm there, I'm rewarded with the views that you usually don't see when you type these countries' names into Google. For example, this is from my trip to Syria, the little town called Malula. It's about 1 hour outside of Damascus. And what's so special about this place is that it's one of the 3 last remaining places in the world where the language of Jesus is still spoken. And I'm not a religious person, but when I arrived there, I was able to go into a church where they were holding a service in this language, and it felt incredibly spiritual and beautiful. This picture is from the Kurdish part of Iraq. It's actually from my second time to that area, and there's a little backstory to it. So in Austria, I became friends with a refugee from that area, and he told me if I ever wanted to visit, his family would be incredibly happy to have me as a guest at their house. So overall, I visited them twice, and this picture was taken on a trip that his father and his brother took me on so that I could see the landscape around their town. Here's one of my favorite pictures from Afghanistan. On my 3rd visit to Afghanistan, I took this road trip outside of Kabul, and this small village is along the road between Kabul and Jalalabad. And this picture is from another road trip that we took the year prior, also with a group of friends. We went north of Kabul into the Panjshir Valley. And when I took this picture in 2020, it reminded me of home, because at that time I lived in Innsbruck. And if you've ever been to Innsbruck, you know this is kind of the perspective that you get. There's mountains covered in snow most of the year. And something that I noticed after I took this picture is you're going to see in the bottom right corner, there's a group of men playing volleyball. And when I spotted that after taking the picture, I felt really warm and happy and also surprised. And then I started to challenge myself. Why did it surprise me to see them playing volleyball? And I think the reason for this is that when we hear about these countries and their people in the news, it's usually in a negative context. We don't hear about them doing normal things. We don't hear about them going to a restaurant, hanging out with their friends, having hobbies, doing normal stuff. But it shouldn't surprise us, you know, because they're humans. So of course they're going to be doing human stuff. And I have a few more reflections. You know, obviously my perspective changed because I had a lot of prejudice before starting traveling in the Middle East. And obviously I've changed my mind on a lot of things, and I will walk you through some of my reflections. First, a little background. I'm sitting on a wall outside of one of Saddam Hussein's old palaces, and behind me is the ancient city of Babylon. So this is in Iraq, and as you can see, I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt. I don't have my hair covered or anything. And just 3 weeks ago, I was also in Iraq, and this is exactly how I was dressed in Baghdad. So the first thing that I reflect on a lot is safety, because people ask me, you know, you're traveling there, so does that mean we can send all the refugees back because it's safe enough to go there? The short answer is no, it's definitely not safe to go there. And actually, every time that I was in Afghanistan, there were explosions and attacks. But it's different how these things affect you, because I have the privilege of leaving whenever I want to. I have the passport that allows me to book a flight the next day and just leave. I can also stay inside if things get so dangerous that I don't want to go outside anymore. I can afford to spend weeks or even months inside and just have food delivered to me, which is an insane privilege. I don't have to go outside to earn money for my family. And I also don't have to make any political statements. I'm there for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. I just don't have to associate with anything political, ethnical, or religious. And when I was there, one time in Kabul, there were 4 explosions in the area of the host family where I was staying. And we were sitting together having dinner, and the father said to me, you know, every day when we leave the home, we don't know if we're all gonna come back together in the evening. And yeah, I don't have children that I have to send out to school in this environment. So this is the big difference, and this is why we need to continue treating every case of a refugee as an individual case. And why me traveling there doesn't mean anything for the people who flee from there. The second thing that I reflect on a lot, and actually I had this put on a slide before the current situation started, is that it's really difficult to know everything about every conflict in every country. And people tend to ask me, how do we fix Afghanistan? How do we fix Syria? What do we need to do here so that this conflict stops? And the answer that I've started giving people now is that the more I travel there, the less everything makes sense. Because from the distance, everything looks so black and white. It seems so logical. It seems like just this one thing needs to happen and then it's all over. But it's so more complicated and it's so more nuanced. And this is why we need to center the people who are from there and who actually have experience, rather than asking somebody like me. I'm just a visitor. I don't have the brain capacity to grasp the complexity of these conflicts. And I'm not ashamed of saying it, because in admitting that I don't have what it takes to analyze these conflicts, I can give the spotlight to the people who do, and ideally who are people from there. The third reflection is a lot lighter than the first 2. I've noticed on my travels that wherever I go, I can find people that I have something in common with, which allows me to make amazing, beautiful connections and friendships. Gaming is one of them. And you probably wouldn't guess that this is in a gaming cafe in Baghdad. And these 2 girls are friends that I met in an online gaming community for the game League of Legends, which I guess, since there are a lot of IT people, some probably know. We were friends for 3 years before I visited them the first time in Iraq. And both of the times that I visited them, we were gaming together in this gaming cafe. And also, gaming has allowed me to make connections in Iran and in Kuwait as well. It's just, you know, young people, they game everywhere, so you can make friends there. The third way that I can make meaningful connections is through my love for animals, and especially horses and horse riding. And this is why I'm a frequent traveler to Jordan. Actually, it all started about 7 years ago when I volunteered in Jordan as a caretaker for horses, where I met my friend Emad, who's a veterinarian in the ancient city of Petra. And I visited him a couple times, and we would just go horse riding together in the desert. And one time he asked me, don't you want to participate in our endurance races? And so I said yes, or I said inshallah, because, you know, that kind of means it's not going to happen anyways. But it did happen. It did happen, and actually this year I completed a 40-kilometer and an 80-kilometer race. And 80 kilometers took me about 6.5 hours on horseback with 2 short breaks in between. So there was a lot of hard work. And my third way that allows me to make connections everywhere is tattoos. And this is important for me to mention, because people often ask me, do I cover my tattoos when I go to these countries? Do people know what it is? How do they respond to it? And so I say they don't really care, or they find it beautiful. And also you can get tattooed there. They have incredibly skilled, talented artists. And on this slide you can see the wonderful guys who tattooed me in Syria, Iraq, and in Iran that I'm still in contact with. Yeah, and even when I'm not getting tattooed myself, I can still make connections through it. For example, on this picture you can see the tattoos of an 80-year-old Iraqi grandma who wanted to show me her tattoos when she saw mine. And this is a picture that I took during one of my interviews in Afghanistan when I was interviewing the owner of a beauty salon. A client came in and asked to have a tattoo done, and I'm not exactly sure if tattooing was illegal at that time or if it was just not something that they advertised. But because I was wearing a short sleeve shirt, I have a sleeve tattoo, so they knew that I was sort of, at least on the receiving end of tattooing, I was an expert, and they got me involved in the process. And it was a really cool experience. Now, I mentioned that I was doing an interview. You're probably wondering what that's about. So I interviewed 20 women in Afghanistan who had opened their own businesses. And I'm writing my PhD on the social aspects of this female entrepreneurship in these environments. Unfortunately, I can't show you the faces of the women because of the situation now with Taliban. But I can give you this beautiful quote that one of the women told me in my interview, and I will read it. "Every woman who opens a business in Afghanistan is a soldier in an army of social change." And I will now introduce to you two stories of such soldiers of social change. Before I get started, this is the typical interview setting in Afghanistan because the hospitality is beyond anything you can imagine. So even if you think you're just going for a 20-minute interview, you're probably going to stay there for 2 hours and you're going to eat so much that you don't want to see food for a week afterwards. I was at their home and we talked, I think, for about 1.5 hours. These two sisters grew up in Iran, and there they started an education center for Afghan refugees, through which they were able to provide school education to 200 refugees. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but basically, if you're an Afghan refugee in Iran, you do not have a good time and also usually don't have access to education. So what they did is extremely wonderful and valuable. When they came back to Kabul, they wanted to do something for women, and they opened a cleaning company. In this cleaning company, they were able to provide jobs for other women. And to understand why this is so powerful, you have to look at the context. After decades of war, in a lot of families, the women have to be breadwinners because the men might be dead or injured or disabled to the point where they can't earn enough money to provide for their families. At the same time, after the restrictions on women's education, a lot of women are illiterate. So they have to be breadwinners without being able to read or write. And this makes them incredibly vulnerable on the job market, obviously. So by providing this cleaning company, these two sisters were able to give a secure job to women who might have had an extremely difficult time or taken advantage of in the job market otherwise. About their business, they said, "We could have started a business that creates more income, more salary, and more advantages for us. But we decided to start a business that supports and helps Afghan women." Now you have these two women whose whole life was dedicated to others, and they always looked for ways to help others. So I also want to add how their story continued. When the Taliban took over Afghanistan, they had to evacuate because of one of the sisters' connection to the back then government of Afghanistan. They were evacuated to Ukraine. And in Ukraine, they had just started to build a new life. And then Russia attacked Ukraine. And so they had to evacuate again. And they're now living in Germany as refugees. And I want to ask the audience to keep the story in mind when you hear the statistics and the numbers of Afghan refugees in Germany, because there are many stories like this one. The second story is about a woman who's still in Afghanistan. When I interviewed her, she had two businesses. One of them was an NGO through which she provided health services, and the other business is something that she opened so that she could have enough money to provide that health service. I can't be more specific because she's still in Afghanistan. When Taliban took over, she had to stop doing both of those businesses, but she decided that she still wanted to do something for her country. She founded an underground education center, because it's illegal, so it's underground, where women would receive basic education and also learn job skills that would enable them to earn an income from their homes. And on this picture, you can see some of the jewelry that the women make when they learn how to make jewelry, and also they learn how to make clothes. I'm still in contact with this woman, and this year she told me, "After the current situation, we are working completely underground. Taliban are banning everything that belongs to women." So I asked her, is it dangerous for you to continue what you're doing? Are you afraid for your life? Is it okay to interview you, to talk about what you're doing? And she said, "Of course I put myself in danger, but this is resistance, and I'm ready to pay the price." When I started doing these talks, people often told me that I'm giving a voice to the voiceless, or that I am the voice of the voiceless. And I used to think that it's a compliment, but now I feel very differently about it, because I don't think that the women or any of the people that I've met on my travels are voiceless. Rather, I think that they're systematically silenced or just unheard on purpose because what they're saying doesn't fit our narratives or doesn't fit what we want them to say. And I have one example of this. When I started my PhD, I was looking for supervisors, and one of the professors that I asked if she wanted to be my supervisor, she said she doesn't want to support my project because she thinks by interviewing them, I'm putting Afghan women in danger. And I was thinking, would you ever make this decision on behalf of a European woman? Why do we think that we need to make this decision on behalf of an Afghan woman just because she's Afghan? Why can't they decide for themselves if they want to do an interview? And so this is the call to action, basically, to just listen to these women and give them a chance to tell their story instead of deciding on their behalf, and by this actually silencing them. And this is where originally I had planned for my talk to end, but with the current situation where I see Arabs, Afghans, and Muslims dehumanized, demonized, portrayed, all of them as terrorists, as evil, as villains, I need to remind the audience that my travels would not have been possible without these men who have time and time again gone out of their way to help me, to keep me safe, without expecting anything in return. I owe them so much, and this is why I'm asking the audience to please keep this in mind when you're following the current narratives. Thank you.